Hey y'all, Eric here. I've been working on this Pico-8 title for a while now, and I haven't put it up for release yet, but I thought it would be cool to do a quick devlog on one of the things I'm trying to fix. So, as part of this little overhead Zelda-like, I don't know what you want to call it, action puzzle game or whatever. You can sort of see I have this like a blue laser beam that moves up and down, and if you touch a laser beam, you explode quite spectacularly. Let's do it again. Oh, it's so good. Um, so yeah, but and currently I'm just drawing this laser beam thing. Oh God, the current draw logic has quite a bit going on, but to simplify, I'm using Pico-8's built-in line functions to draw what amounts to like a rectangle. And as you can see, the rectangle sort of changes in length depending on if it's hitting a wall or if it's hitting one of these boxes as it moves up and down. And I sort of did like a flashing effect by using a built-in frame counter. And if the frame counter mod for is this one value, then it flashes, and that sort of gives it this sort of ethereal laser-like effect. This works for what it is, but I'm not super happy with it, and I wanted to see if I could accomplish the same thing using some sprites. I think the challenge here will be, well, the primary challenge here will be that I'm not a pixel artist, and so it's not going to look very good. But the other challenge is I'm used to only drawing sprites in 8 by 8 or multiples of 8 sizes, and this thing, because the obstacles aren't necessarily occurring every 8 pixels, they could occur anywhere. The length has to be sort of dynamic, and the sprites have to be drawn maybe partially, which isn't something I've done before. So I'm gonna see if I can get that to work, and I don't know, we'll see how it goes. So my first thought in terms of sprites was to just kind of draw out this funky electricity looking guy. And I sort of just drew like this, I don't know, vaguely sine wave-esque pattern in the same blue color, but with some white outline and make it look kind of erratic. My thought here is that because each of the four sprites begins and ends at the same x coordinate, that I can mix and match them, so they don't necessarily have to go in this order. I can sort of put them in an arbitrary order, and that if I use rand to do that, it'll make it look kind of like this funky, erratic looking electricity thing, and hopefully will never just be the same thing over and over again across the entire length of the beam, although statistically that's entirely possible. But let me see if I can get that to work first. For my initial attempt at this, what I'm thinking is, actually, let me pull up the sprite sheet again. What I'm thinking is I'm just going to do a loop, and we'll work in blocks of 8 first. So we'll just draw like a thing that is a length that is a multiple of 8, so we don't have to worry about partial sprites right away. And we'll do 8 sprites long, and let me change the name of this guy to offset instead of index here, just for clarity. So yeah, we're going to draw 8 sprites across. And for each sprite, I'm going to randomly choose from 1, 2, 3, or 4. Right, that's what this rand guy is doing here. So we're starting at sprite index 1, and we're just adding this random offset. So this value here for the sprite number is either going to be what? I guess 1, yeah, 1, 2, 3, or 4, which corresponds to these 4 sprites. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this could happen in any order. So we're going to draw 8 iterations of pseudo-randomly one of these 4 guys. And the way we're drawing it, so Pico-8 sprite function takes the first argument is the sprite number, the second argument and the third argument are the x and y coordinates. And so I want this thing to draw horizontally from left to right. And so as I go through this loop, I'm just going to add 8 pixels to each thing, which would allow each of these sprites to sort of connect to one another. And so if we do this, this is kind of what we get at first, which is not bad. My initial reaction to looking at this is, one, I'm sort of seeing what looks like like the same thing happening a lot, although that may just be my bias. Like I see like what looks like one sprite occurring more than other sprites, but maybe I'm wrong about that. And also it's sort of like changing really quickly, so my eyes are having a hard time processing it's almost too erratic, right? And probably it doesn't look quite so bad after YouTube is going to encode this thing. But to me, yeah, it looks like super, super erratic. So let me take another run at this and see what I can do. What I'm thinking right now is maybe rather than updating it every frame, I'll update it every couple of frames and see if that makes it look a little bit less bananas. I made a couple of changes here. So I opted to separate the updating of which sprites were being selected to the sprites that are being drawn. So I have two loops, and I'm keeping track of the number of frames that are going. And if frame counter mod 2 is 0, so like every other frame, to simplify that, I'm updating this beam state table with like a random index. So I'm only going to update the indices every other frame. And then in the second loop, I'm just drawing those frames to screen. So what this will do is it'll sort of slow down the frequency with which the beam updates, like the sprites. So it'll be like a little bit less erratic looking. So the result of that was this, which is not bad. It's like a little bit more snaky looking now, for lack of a better term. What I'm thinking is like in the sprites that I drew on this first go around, I sort of I drew these blue or like this blue main part and then sort of sprinkled some white bits around it. What I'm wondering is like maybe I can like have the white be a separate set of sprites. So it's like sort of a separate beam and have both of those beams be drawn sort of pseudo randomly and have just the blue one be on top. And so it'll give it like a little bit more erratic looking shape. I think that'll work. Let me draw that up and see how it looks. So let's have a look first at the sprite changes. So I sort of stripped out the white outline bits from the blue beam and I created like a second very similar white beam. So if you kind of look at them in their entirety, kind of look like that. So they're quite similar, but they're just, you know, they're sort of single pixel differences that make them distinct. And then in the code, the way I handled this was sort of had these two beam state arrays. So beam state 0 is for the blue beam state 1 is for the white beam. And I'm giving both of them random values every other frame. So it's important to call ran twice because otherwise what I want to do is not always necessarily have, you know, this blue beam drawn with this white beam. I want to have like this blue beam drawn with this one or with this one or with this one. So I want to mix and match, right? So that's why I have to call ran twice. So I'm storing two sets of sprites. Every other frame I'm updating them and then I draw them. And the result of that is actually not too bad looking. Let me switch to Pico-8. So the result of that is this, which is kind of what I'm going for. I wanted something, you know, vaguely electricity looking and erratic, and I think that kind of gets the job done. I don't know how it's going to look when I plug it into the game, but I think this is a good start. Now the thing I need to tackle is how to handle lengths that are not multiples of 8. So like I was saying, in the game itself, it could be blocked by, you know, an item that the player kind of has control over the placement of. So it doesn't necessarily hit a wall every 8 pixels. It could hit a wall after, you know, 9 pixels or 10 pixels. And so we have to draw partial sprites, which I've never done before. So now I'm going to take an attempt at that. All right, things got a lot longer while you were gone. Let me try and explain what's going on. So I started off by adding this length variable, which will represent sort of the horizontal length of the beam that we're going to draw. I also added these two calls to Pico-8's line function just to draw vertical pink lines at the beginning and end of the beam length so that we can kind of make sure that things are working right. It's like a debugging visual. You can see those in the sort of small Pico-8 window on the left there. Yeah, and so every other frame, I'm resetting these two beam state tables to be empty tables again, just because of the algorithm that I chose. If I don't do that, they sort of grow indefinitely, and that's bad. So yeah, every other frame, we're just going to reset them to be empty again, and we're going to fill those guys up. So the first thing we do is we check, we're going to iterate over the length divided by 8, and we're using integer division. So in this case, our length is 64, which means we'll take 8 passes through this loop. And this is what we were doing before, right? So for each 8 pixel block, we're going to randomly select one of the sprites for each of those 2 beams. And then this is kind of the new bit. Let me get this out of there. That's some debugging message in there. So if the length is not a clean multiple of 8, so if we do this modulus of 8 here and there's any remainder at all, which means length mod 8 greater than 0. So if there's any remainder, we're going to randomly select one more and add that to each of the 2 beam tables. And the way I'm sort of doing the append action is by checking the length of each of those tables and adding 1 and putting the sprite there. So this is the bit that if I don't reset the tables at the top of this loop, this is what was causing. At one point I had the beams that would just like every couple of frames they would get 1 block longer and longer and longer. So yeah, so it was because I was checking the length here and I was just endlessly appending stuff. And then in the draw function right now, I'm not doing anything funky. Let me get this out of the way. I'm not doing anything funky in the draw function yet. I'm just kind of looping through the length of, and I'm using beam state 0 because 0 and 1 should be the same length. But I'm just looping through and drawing those beams. And so effectively right now, we shouldn't see anything different. Let me just reload here. So there we go. We can see those 2 lines. The beam length is 64, so we've got 8 sprites being drawn on the screen here. Things will get a little bit more interesting. So let me, in my terminal now, I'm going to set the length to, say, 68, which is not a clean multiple of 8. So what we should expect to see here is, first of all, the pink line on the right should move 4 pixels to the right, and it should add 1 more beam sprite to the end. Right here, right? And as we can see here, this is the part that is going to be a little bit challenging. We've added another 8 pixels, but we don't want a full 8 pixel sprite, right? We only want an additional 4 pixels. So what I have to do now is for that last bit of the draw routine, only draw the partial sprites. So my suspicion is that down here in this drawing bit, we'll probably have to do something similar here where we're checking to see if the length is if the length mod 8 is greater than 0. So we'll have to do some sort of check to see, like, are we just going to print out all of the sprites completely, or is there like a bit at the end we'll have to do a partial sprite draw? Okay, so let me walk through the changes to the drawing routine. The first thing we do is we're going to iterate through the beam state table. And the big change is we're going to omit the last sprite in the table, right? And the reason we're going to do that is because that last sprite may or may not be a full sprite. It might be partial, and we don't know yet. So we're just going to like kick that decision down the road and only draw everything up to, but not including the last sprite. So there's no big surprises here. Although I did switch the order of the white beam and the blue beam drawing order while I was doing this, just because I wanted the blue beam stuff to be on top. I wanted the primary color to be blue. All right, so now we've got everything up to the last sprite, and that might be a full 8 pixel sprite that we need, and it might not be. We're going to check that here. Down here, I'm checking, I'm just assigning length mod 8 to a variable called overflow, partially to save a few tokens, but partially just for readability, right? So we know that we may or may not have some overflow beyond a full 8 pixel multiple. If our overflow is 0, that means we've got a nice clean multiple of 8 for the length of our beam. So that may be 32 or 40 or 48 or whatever. And in that case, we just draw the last sprite in from the beam state table normally. No trickiness here. The interesting bit happens if we have some overflow, right? In this case, maybe our length is not 64, but 68, which means our overflow value will be 4. This guy, right? Because we took the mod of length by 8, so overflow is 4, we need 4 pixels. Now Pico-8's sprite drawing function, this guy, allows us to pass in a fractional value for the length and width of the sprite. So you'll notice in these two calls to sprite, we're only passing 3 arguments, right? The sprite number, the x position to draw it at, and the y position to draw it at, the x and y coordinates. Here, we're passing extra arguments. We're passing in the sprite number, the x and y coordinates at which to draw the sprite, and also these 2 values here. And this is the width and height of the sprite to draw. And this is normally 1, right? Because normally sprites are 8 by 8. So if you pass 1.0 and 1.0 for the height and width, Pico-8 will draw an 8 by 8 sprite. In our case, though, we want to draw a fractional sprite in the width direction, in the x direction. If our length is 68, that means our overflow is 4, which means we only want to draw half of the 8-pixel sprite. Right? So we've already got the 64 pixels from the above loop. We need the last 4 pixels, and we only want half the sprite, which means overflow is 4 by 8. This gives us a 0.5 value here. It's like effectively this value, it's 0.5 in the case where our length is 68. I did find out that, or at least I'm not sure about this, but I found because the value should default to 1.0, I tried just passing in the width parameter, and it didn't seem to draw the sprite correctly. So I'm passing in the height parameter, even though this is always going to be 1. So now let's look at what happens when we run this. And we'll start first with a length of 64, which is our default case. So we'll just make sure that everything is working as we expect. And cool, everything looks good, right? This is not the tricky bit. We know we're drawing 8 sprites in a row. If we change this to 68 though, so we can see that the sprite is extending exactly to the line and not beyond it. So that's good. One other thing that we might want to test is what happens when the length is less than 8, just to make sure that we're not running into any weird edge cases. So let me set a length of 4 and refresh. And that also looks good. We kind of get this baby electricity beam. So that looks pretty good. I'm using a kind of a butt ton of tokens to do this, which I'm not super happy about. And there may be a more efficient way to do it. But for now, I think what I'm going to do is just plug this into the game as it is and see how it looks. So as I was doing the integration of the new code into the game, I forgot to change the sprite offsets to be the new beam sprites and just left in the defaults for my little demo cart there. And the result is what you see here, which I thought was pretty funny. So let me just share that with you before I fix it. It's like a little army of dudes. Okay, well, I fixed the army of dudes bug, and I got the beam in there. You can see the drawing routine is a little bit funky still. It's not extending all the way to the end, and there's that weird thing kind of on the left there. So let me see if I can figure out why it's doing that. Okay, yeah, so looking pretty good. So I kind of dragged this crate over into the middle so that it's sort of in between tiles. Oh God. As I was saying, I dragged the crate over into the middle so it's in between 2 tiles, so we can see that, you know, it's definitely not at a multiple of 8 to test that the beam will actually do what it's supposed to do, and it looks like it does, right? It's sort of, see if I can pause it as it passes past that crate. There we go. Yeah, so you can see it's sort of stopping in the middle. So this is definitely not a clean 8-pixel length. So I think this is working. I'm not super happy with the appearance of this thing. I think it doesn't stand out quite as well. So I may go back and clean up the pixel art, in inverted commas, the pixel art a little bit. But yeah, that worked out pretty well in terms of using Pico-8's partial sprite functionality. So yeah, thanks everybody for watching this little devlog. I hope you found it useful or at least entertaining. Yeah, I'll catch you all later. Bye for now.